clearly told me that particular night nobody left the table. And that goes by the bartender and that goes by the waitresses. And they didn't go and check on the children periodically because they said they did. Friends, we're extremely embarrassed because the general public came really strong. How could parents leave their children alone and go out and party all night long?
Nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until.
Hello and a warm welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Chalk and cheese, wheat and chaff. That's how different the stories of the Tapas 9 are to the Ocean Club staff. Some of the most underreported stories in this particular narrative are the stories from the Portuguese folk. Take Sylvia Batista, who had worked at the Ocean Club for more than 20 years. As you can imagine, Sylvia was in the thick of things on the night of May 3rd, 2007. You're going to want to buckle up for this one. Fasten your seatbelts and put your tray tables up. Before we get to this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind you can look at my Patreon page, join the community there for further analysis. It's patreon.com/TCRS. I do recommend the $3 tier. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So the story for Sylvia Batista started like this. She was alerted to Madeleine's disappearance between 10:30 p.m. and 11 p.m. She was at home and she was informed about the event by a telephone call. She immediately went to the Ocean Club, where she arrived only minutes before the GNR officers. When she arrived at the resort, she went immediately to apartment 5A, where she met several persons both on the inside and on the outside of the apartment. She went into the apartment but left it right away without speaking to anyone, because she was informed that the GNR officers were at the main reception, and so she went to meet them. Now, from this we see what a normal response would be to news from a hotel resident that a child was missing. Far from the GNR taking a long time to arrive, they arrived just after Sylvia herself, who is a director at the hotel. Bear in mind, when the alarm is raised, it's past 10 o'clock at night in this small resort town, and people are settling down for bed. Now, when I walked the streets of Praia da Luz in my own simulation on the night of May 3rd, 2019, this was at around 10 p.m., there was only one person out and about walking his dog, right? This was walking from the Ocean Club, apartment 5A, from that door, past the Smith siding, to the ocean, and then making my way back and arriving back at the tennis courts. I only saw one person. And also a single car, a dark Mercedes-Benz, also near the area of the Smith siding, because at that time the village tucks in for the night. Also, you can imagine this had happened before at the hotel, especially since it's a family hotel geared to families with small children. A child goes missing, only for it to be resolved not long afterward. Even so, the director hightails it to the hotel, and the police arrive just after she does. What happens next? Well, the Ocean Club, the town of Luz, the entire Algarve for that matter, have no idea what is about to be sprung on them by the MCCANNs, the Tapas 7, and I guess the British media. But who could imagine anything like this happening? Number 2.
So certain are you?
According to her witness statement, Sylvia also realized that from the very first moment on, both Jerry and the rest of the group members insisted in stating that Madeleine had been abducted, all of them using the word abducted instead of missing, and they all showed great interest in informing the press about the situation. Now, imagine arriving into a situation like that in real time, just after the incident. You're a local, you've been working where you've worked for 20 years. It's not even 11 p.m. at night on the night of May 3rd. Madeleine hasn't even been missing for an hour since the alarm was raised, and there's already a complete consensus within the group that she's been abducted. This consensus to those present feels a little forced. It's too rigid, it's too certain, and it's too specific. The other alarming thing that would be a portent of things to come was the ominous interest in the group in informing the press about the situation. It reminds one a little of the Ramseys, where their first port of call was an appearance on CNN to tell their story on their own terms, rather than in a police station on someone else's terms, where they could face some proper cross-examination. Number 3, credibility of Tanner's sighting called into question from the get-go. From a deposition, at a given moment the deponent translated the deposition from one of the ladies that belonged to the group of English people, namely one that she indicates as being a brunette. Now I think that is a reference to Jane Tanner. This lady told the GNR officers and the deponent translated that she had seen a man crossing the road, possibly carrying a child. The deponent found that situation strange. In other words, Sylvia Batista found this a strange statement because she was convinced that when she saw this man, the lady, Jane Tanner I guess, was positioned in a spot that had no viewing angle, that had no line of sight essentially to the location where she had seen the man. So she's calling into question, Sylvia Batista is questioning the Tanner sighting, like immediately, instantly. She doesn't know exactly where the lady was positioned when she saw the man passing by, but she knows, Sylvia knows, that she indicated, that Jane Tanner indicated, that Jane saw this man passing on the street that lies in front of the window to the bedroom area where Madeleine was, walking into the direction of the street that leads to the Baptista supermarket. Now, it's difficult to extrapolate from this statement how and why Sylvia felt she had cause to doubt Jane Tanner's statement. One potential clue is, you heard at the beginning of this clip, Joseph Mora, the CBS journalist from Boston, who was also an investigator who could speak Portuguese. He went to Praia da Luz and he spoke to the Ocean Club staff, and that was what he said to the 9 News reporter in the Maddie podcast. Basically that his understanding was that no one left the table, and I suppose that would include Jane Tanner. If this is true, and if Jane Tanner was one of those in the bar who didn't leave the bar, then from the inside of the restaurant, that would certainly be true. From there, it would be impossible to see anyone walking across the top of the road. Now, whether you trust Batista or not, it turns out that the Tanner sighting was a false flag. It wasted police resources for around 5 years. And even the law enforcement, the cops, acknowledged that it was a mistake to rely as much as they did on that and on the timeline created by the Tanner sighting. So in this instance, if the authorities had listened to Batista, if they had preferred, if they had relied on her, right, the investigation could have been put on the right track from the start. So how did it get derailed? Well, by listening to someone from the MCCANN group who was extremely sure that she saw something, right? And that is just like they were all extremely sure it was an abduction. Number 4, Madeleine is dead and then Madeleine is alive again. Going back to her statement, the deponent also wishes to mention that at around 3 a.m., Madeleine's parents asked for the presence of a priest on location. They didn't explain the reason why they wanted a priest, but the deponent found the fact strange, as there was no indications that the little girl was dead, and that the circumstance under which usually the presence of a priest is requested. Do you agree with that? That usually in a situation like that where you request a priest, then you would imagine something serious has happened. I think that makes sense, based on the behavior of the McCanns, to assume Madeleine was dead, to assume from their behavior that they thought something serious had happened, and what's more, they'd sort of accepted this. That's what Sylvia assumed, and that's what I would have assumed as well. But how could they have been so certain at such an early stage? Well, we saw the same thing in the Ramsey case, where they also summoned a reverend, a pastor, a priest. I think his name was Haverstock. And one could imagine the summoning of a priest in at least two ways. One is that it's an indication of guilty knowledge. Another is that the child's parents, who are also victims in this, of a sort, are in need of comfort. And I think we tend to forget that whether guilty or not, the child's parents are in a way victims themselves, in the sense that they've lost someone close to them, someone that is beloved, someone that they would prefer not to have lost. Of course, both explanations could be true at the same time as well, guilty knowledge and a need to be comforted. While Sylvia saw no indications the little girl was dead, several months later, two Cocker Spaniels would enter that apartment, and they would give indications that someone was dead after all. What's worth noting is very prematurely, less than 4 hours after Madeleine is gone, her parents seem convinced that she's dead. But then, after she remains missing for more than 10 years, they're more convinced than ever, without any evidence, that she's alive. Number 5. Abductor's route to the bedroom window is blocked. This is one of the most astute observations in this case, if not the most astute in the entire case. Like the no footprints in the snow narrative, that narrative alone could have dispelled with, destroyed, done away with the entire intruder theory. Well, the fact that the cots were aligned with no space to get through, as I understand it, if that's true, well then it means an abduction simply couldn't have taken place. Because one can't imagine the abductor putting Madeleine down and then closing the gap he just opened between the cots once he got to the window. Let's have a look at what she says. The deponent recalls that the cots that were used by the babies were placed in the middle of the room and aligned, and therefore she found it strange that someone could have taken Madeleine from the bed where she was sleeping up to the window because there was no space to get through. Now, those words suggest to me that those cots were not only aligned, but right beside each other. The deponent opened the bedroom's wardrobe to check if eventually Madeleine was hiding inside. Then they all left the room, and someone closed its door again. Sylvia Batista remained in the living room for a while with the GNR officers, and Jerry as well, and the other group members. She described them being there in a frenzy, going in and out and speaking on their mobile phones. She noticed that none of the group members, including the child's mother and father, were busy looking for her. The mother was sitting on the master bedroom's bed. The father accompanied the deponent and the GNR officers and the other group members that walked in and out and spoke on the phone, and they were apparently concerned about informing the press about the event. It's also important to stress that if Sylvia's statement is reliable, then the crime scene photos showing a gap between the cots aren't the way she found them when she arrived. Number 6. Sylvia noticed none of the group members were looking for her, were looking for Madeleine. Incredibly, while the entire town seems to have been mobilized from their beds and are out searching, the McCanns and the group had either already given up or had other fish to fry, namely calling the media. Now, in fairness, you would imagine someone would have to look after the twins, and someone else would have to engage with law enforcement. But equal to that, you'd imagine the people who would most want to look for Madeleine would actually look for her. This aspect sort of holds hands with what I said in a previous analysis about perhaps not giving out the best or most helpful photo of Madeleine if you were dead set in making sure a witness recognized her, if you really wanted to find her. And so what are the group engaged in? Not reaching out to the officers, but reaching out to the press. I don't think you can criticize the cops on the one hand for being late or for not closing down the borders or for not releasing the National Guard at a moment's notice. While on the other hand, you yourself what are you doing? You're talking to journalists rather than to the cops. And remember, you've called them there because you want to give them your input, but instead you're giving your input to the media and to your phone. And now we come to number 7. Jerry closed the windows so the twins could sleep. Kate said the first thing she noticed was that the room was unusually light.
Was surprised looking toward the bedroom to see more light than she expected to see.
Well, Sylvia Batista found the room dark when she arrived. Also, Sylvia found the shutters were down and the windows closed. Perhaps the most shocking of all 7 shockers is Jerry's story that after finding the windows and curtain open, he closed them so the twins could sleep inside. Let's go to her deposition. The deponent further recalls that she entered the room where Madeleine had been sleeping. She now remembers that the door was closed. The inside of the room was dark. The shutters were down and light entered only through its holes. The windows were closed and the curtains slightly open. Jerry, who accompanied the deponent during this visit, with the GNR officers also present, said it had been him who had closed the window because the babies were still sleeping inside, which the deponent could verify as true. Now, I mean, that was also something that was very odd. The fact that the twins were sleeping, and also that the twins were sleeping despite the stampede of people in and out. And I think they continued sleeping like completely asleep for many hours after the incident had occurred. Jerry mentioned that when he noticed that Madeleine was missing, he had found the windows and shutters open and the curtains fluttering. Well, I guess we're going to have to take his word for it, right? Right?
Well, that's a very entertaining story, but unfortunately real detectives have to worry about that little thing called evidence.
Now, whether you want to say that in a sneering way or in a straight-up way, it's nevertheless true. The problem is, for the window and shutters to be closed after an abductor had opened them, Jerry would have had to have left his fingerprints on them. Well, did he? No. The only fingerprints found were Kate's, not Jerry's, and nor any abductors. Of course, all of the phoning that night did its work all right. By the next morning, all of Britain was abuzz with talk of a break-in and family members retelling the nonsense that shutters were jammed, that there was a break-in. Even though there was no evidence, the narrative had taken over. The words and statements became the de facto default mainstream narrative.
In the hours and days that followed, the McCann's family and friends in the UK told reporters that the shutters were variously broken, jimmied open, or smashed. In fact, the shutters were not in any way damaged. Initial accounts from Portugal appear to indicate a cut-and-dried case of child abduction.
They were just, watching the hotel room and going back every half hour, and the shutters have been broken open and they've gone into the room and taken Madeleine.
Is this a little girl, the sort of little girl that could have wandered off on her own? Would that be at all an option to look at? Or do
No, not at all. It's been broken into.
Whenever you see a concerted effort to control a narrative, you've got to wonder about the other narrative that is out there, hidden in the darkness. I'm not going to take it further than that. I will put a copy of Sylvia Batista's full statement in the description, and you can read that at your leisure. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.